His growl wasn't just a sound, it was a warning. A deep, thunderous rumble that echoed through the metal bars of kennel number 19, stopping even the bravest shelter workers in their tracks. They called him Bruno, but only in whispers. The other dogs barked, whined, wagged tails. Bruno didn't. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just watched, still and silent, like a storm waiting to break. The scars on his muzzle told enough of his story. Abandoned in an alley after a suspected backyard fighting ring was shut down, Bruno had survived, but not without becoming something darker. Vets couldn't get near him. Trainers refused. Volunteers fed him by pushing bowls through a gap in the kennel door with a broomstick. Every time someone tried to get close, Bruno launched. Not just barking, attacking. Foam at the mouth, bloodshot eyes, full rage. No one touched him in 76 days. Then, on a rain-heavy Tuesday, he arrived. Not with force. Not with gloves. Not even with a leash. Just a quiet presence and a thermos of chicken broth. His name was Caleb. He stood at the edge of the kennel, hands in pockets, heart pounding beneath a worn army jacket. He didn't speak. He didn't flinch. And Bruno didn't lunge. The staff started from behind the glass, frozen. Something was happening. The air shifted. Bruno's growl softened, just slightly, for the first time in over 2 months. His tail twitched, and Caleb, still silent, knelt to the ground and slowly set down the thermos, steam curling like breath into the cold. Bruno sniffed the air. His ears flicked. His nose dropped low, nostrils flaring. Then, in a moment no one could explain, he inched forward. Just once. No attack. No growl. A single step. And something gleamed in the dark behind those tired amber eyes. Something long gone. Hope. Rain tapped lightly on the shelter's tin roof. A steady rhythm in the early morning hush. Outside, fog rolled low over the pine-covered hills, curling like breath from the earth itself. The kennels stood in a quiet row, their concrete floors damp from the overnight chill. A faint scent of wet fur, rust, and disinfectant hung in the air. Birds didn't sing here. Not anymore. Not since Bruno arrived. And yet, this morning felt different. Something unseen shifted with the mist. Caleb stood at the edge of the gravel path, his boots soaked, shoulders squared beneath a faded army jacket. He didn't move right away. He watched the clouds pass over the hills like slow-moving ships and listened to the quiet groans of the waking shelter. A dog barked in the distance, sharp, high-pitched, but Bruno's kennel remained silent. Caleb's gaze lingered on the end unit where Bruno waited. He could feel the air grow colder the closer he got. Inside, Bruno lay still, head resting on massive paws, eyes open but unblinking. The dim light overhead buzzed and flickered, casting long shadows along the walls. His food sat untouched, pushed far into the corner where even hunger couldn't reach. The workers had long given up trying. One glance at the deep scratches along the kennel walls was enough to remind them why. Still, Caleb's fingers twitched slightly as he held the thermos tight. He wasn't new to broken things, but this was different. He approached slowly, each footstep carefully placed, more like a whisper than a sound. As he neared the kennel door, the faintest glint caught his eye. A tattered red collar lay half-buried in straw just inside the gate, crusted with dirt but catching the morning's dim light. Caleb's throat tightened, not from fear but something else. A pull, a question, a past he didn't yet know but somehow felt. Inside the kennel, Bruno's eyes shifted. He saw the man, the thermos, the collar, and for a moment too brief to hold on to, the rigid tension in his massive frame faltered. Not enough for trust, but enough to be noticed. Something fragile stirred in the cold. Something like the start of a crack in solid stone. Caleb wasn't the kind of man people noticed in a crowd. Quiet, lean, eyes that seemed to carry a 1,000-mile stare. He had once worn a uniform, had once been someone others depended on when things got loud and dangerous. But now, all that remained were the scars, some visible, most not. Since leaving the army, he'd drifted from town to town, always moving, never settling. Sleep came in fragments. Conversations never lasted. And connection, That was a bridge he'd burned a long time ago, until he stumbled across the shelter's notice board, and something about the name Bruno stopped him cold. They said Bruno was unfixable, aggressive, dangerous, a liability, the kind of dog people whispered about and avoided. But Caleb saw the photo, mud-splattered, eyes full of something far deeper than anger, something Caleb recognized, pain wearing the mask of rage. He hadn't meant to stop, hadn't meant to ask questions. But now he found himself back at the shelter every day, thermos in hand, just standing near the kennel like a man waiting for a storm to pass. Caleb knew dogs. His last partner in the field, Rex, had taken a bullet to the ribs and still dragged him out of a collapsed building. Loyalty like that didn't die easily. It haunted you. And looking into Bruno's eyes, Caleb wondered if this creature had once given that same loyalty to someone, and if that someone had broken it beyond repair. Bruno didn't growl anymore. He didn't need to. His silence was enough. Still, every day, Caleb sat nearby, speaking softly, not expecting a response. He didn't try to force a connection. He just showed up. And that was something Bruno hadn't seen in a long time. The shelter staff didn't understand it. "You're wasting your time," they said. "That dog's broken." But Caleb didn't flinch, because if he believed that, he'd have to believe the same about himself. And he wasn't ready to give up just yet. Bruno, for all his stillness, was watching, listening. His ears twitched when Caleb's voice came through the cold air. His nose flared when the thermos hissed open with the scent of broth. And deep behind those wary, golden eyes, something flickered. Something too quiet to name, but loud enough to notice. And then, one morning, as Caleb turned to leave, a low sound echoed behind him. Not a growl, not a bark, just a single, uncertain whine. Caleb froze. He didn't turn around. But his heart beat differently that day. Bruno's whine changed everything. The next day, Caleb returned earlier than usual. No words, no expectations. Just the same quiet man with a thermos, sitting near the chain-link fence that separated him from the dog everyone feared. Bruno didn't make a sound that time, but he didn't turn away either. His head stayed raised, ears pivoted toward Caleb. That was enough. Over the following days, a fragile rhythm bloomed. Caleb would arrive before dawn, the frost still clinging to the windows of the shelter. Bruno would be waiting, not close, not eager, but watching. Sometimes he'd stand. Sometimes he'd inch forward a few paces. The staff noticed but said nothing now. There was a shift in the air, and even the hardened volunteers weren't sure how to process it. Then came the morning Bruno stood near the gate and let Caleb touch the fence without backing away. His tail didn't wag, but it didn't lower either. Caleb pressed his hand to the cold metal, and for the briefest second, Bruno leaned forward and touched his nose to it. It was like lightning in Caleb's chest, a jolt of connection he hadn't felt since the battlefield. 2 weeks later, Caleb signed the papers. Bruno was coming home. The adjustment was rocky. Bruno didn't trust rooms. He didn't eat unless Caleb left the house. He growled at windows and barked at sudden noises. But Caleb didn't react with force or frustration. He just gave space, offered gentle words, left doors open, and stayed patient. And over time, Bruno softened. He began sleeping near Caleb's bed. He started following him from room to room. The leash wasn't needed in the yard. And one night, during a thunderstorm, Bruno climbed onto the couch and pressed against Caleb's side, trembling, but trusting. Then, 3 months after the adoption, Bruno vanished. Caleb returned home late from the grocery store to find the back gate ajar. Panic exploded through him. He called Bruno's name, his voice cracking in the wind. No reply, no sound, no footprints on the wet soil, just silence. The entire yard felt wrong. Not just empty, but invaded. Caleb's military instincts surged back like muscle memory. He scanned for signs. Scratch marks near the latch, a broken piece of wood beneath the gate hinge. Someone had opened it. This wasn't an accident. He searched until sunrise, his boots muddy, voice hoarse. He filed a police report. He visited every shelter in the county. Nothing. Caleb plastered the town with flyers, posted in every online group, knocked on doors. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. It wasn't just about a lost dog. It was personal. It was war again, because Bruno wasn't the kind to run. He was taken, and Caleb knew someone had planned it. A week later, he found something. A clue, small but damning. Behind an abandoned storage shed 3 blocks from his house, he found Bruno's collar, torn, frayed. The ID tag scratched up like someone had tried to erase the name. Caleb crouched down, touching it with reverence, anger brewing in his gut. Whoever took Bruno hadn't expected someone like Caleb to come looking. But they'd made a mistake. He wasn't a civilian anymore. Caleb called in favors. Old contacts. People he hadn't spoken to since deployment. One of them owed him big. Within days, a private investigator tracked down a lead. A man known for collecting dogs. Not rescuing them, trafficking them. Especially aggressive breeds. Underground fights. Illegal sales. Brutal conditions. Caleb's blood ran cold. If Bruno was in that world, he didn't have much time. The man's name was Leo Draven, a former breeder turned criminal. He'd been under investigation before but always slipped away. His compound sat on the edge of the next county, just outside jurisdiction, tucked behind a lumber yard. Surveillance photos confirmed the worst. Cages, dozens of them, some dogs barely visible, all of them silent. One of them had a scar on his left side, the kind only Caleb would recognize. The kind Rex had once left behind, a mirrored wound. It was Bruno. Caleb didn't wait for permission. He scouted the compound at night, mapping every camera, every blind spot. His hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. He was methodical, patient. For 3 nights he watched. On the 4th he moved. The lock on the rear fence snapped quietly. Caleb wore black, his boots soft on gravel. The air reeked of bleach and filth. He passed rows of cages, some empty, some not. Dogs whimpered. One growled. None barked. They were all too broken for that now. Then he saw him. Bruno was curled in the corner of his cage, ribs visible, one eye swollen. But when Caleb whispered his name, the dog's head snapped up. A pause, a heartbeat, and then movement. Fast, desperate. Bruno threw himself against the cage bars, silent but shaking with urgency. Caleb dropped to his knees, hand between the rusted grates. "I'm here," he whispered. "I've got you." The lock took 30 seconds. The guards noticed in 15. Yelling echoed across the lot as lights flared. Caleb scooped Bruno into his arms, lighter than he should have been, and ran. Shots rang out. He didn't look back. His mind only knew one thing: move forward. Get Bruno out. Get them both home. He ducked through the fence, hit the ground rolling, and vanished into the trees. The truck was parked a mile away. Bruno didn't make a sound. He didn't need to. His body pressed tight to Caleb's chest, heart beating against heart, breath sinking like it used to in combat. They made it. Back at the house, Bruno collapsed on the couch, too weak to stand. Caleb called the vet, stayed up all night. Fluids, stitches, rest. Time blurred, but Bruno healed. Slowly. Every day his eyes came back to life. The fear faded. The trust returned. But there was something else too. Something deeper. A fire. Bruno had seen darkness again. And this time he hadn't been alone in it. Caleb had come for him, risked everything, fought for him. And dogs, more than anyone, understand what it means to be rescued. They don't forget it. They live for it. The forest air felt colder than usual as Caleb retraced the investigator's last lead. A neighbor near the compound had claimed to hear barking deep in the woods, not far from the back trails that smugglers and poachers once used. With a flashlight in one hand and Bruno's shredded collar in the other, Caleb moved quietly through the overgrown path, his boots pressing into damp leaves. The silence between trees was loud, oppressive, but then a subtle shift in the mud caught his attention. Paw prints, fresh ones, big enough to be Bruno's. His heart thudded as he knelt down to examine them. The direction was clear, and so was the message. Bruno had been here, and maybe he still was. For the first time in days, Caleb allowed a sliver of hope to creep in. The prints moved steadily, unbroken. It meant Bruno wasn't being dragged, he was walking. Maybe weak, maybe scared, but free. As the trail led deeper, Caleb noticed broken twigs and spots of disturbed soil, like Bruno had paused or turned around. Then, faintly, almost carried on the breeze, he heard it. A bark. Short, choked, but it was there. He stood still, listening with every cell in his body, eyes scanning the shadows. The bark didn't come again, but it had been real. Caleb quickened his pace, heart racing, hands shaking. The forest no longer felt empty. Then, out of nowhere, a loud rustle to his right made him spin, flashlight raised. Figure moved quick, low, wrong. Not Bruno. A coyote dashed across the trail and vanished into the brush. Caleb let out a breath, nerves raw. He pressed forward, refusing to let his mind spiral. Every few steps, he whispered Bruno's name like a chant, as if the wind might carry it to him. The trees began to thin near a rock slope, and beneath a fallen log he spotted fur. His stomach flipped, but as he approached, it wasn't Bruno. It was a stray, limp and frail, too far gone to move. Caleb paused, knelt, and whispered soft words. The dog blinked once, just once, and he knew he couldn't save this one. He kept going, more determined now. If Bruno was out here, he was alive, and he needed Caleb. A small clearing opened up ahead. In the middle, tracks again. These were scattered, overlapping, like a struggle had happened. Caleb scanned the trees, and then saw it. Tufts of fur stuck to a broken branch, and beside it, something metal glinting in the moonlight. A tag. Caleb grabbed it. It wasn't Bruno's, but it had blood on it. His jaw clenched. Someone else's dog hadn't been as lucky. The silence returned, deeper than before. Caleb was just about to turn when a low growl drifted through the dark. He froze. Then, slowly, he turned his light. Behind a tree, eyes gleamed, watching. He called out gently, his voice low, hopeful. "Bruno, is that you?" The eyes didn't move. He crouched, arm extended, whispering again. A step, then another. Finally, the figure emerged. Not Bruno, but another German shepherd, leaner, aggressive. It bared its teeth, but Caleb didn't flinch. "It's okay," he murmured, holding his ground. After a long moment, the dog backed away and disappeared. Caleb knew then, dogs were out here, hiding, some wild, some lost. And that meant Bruno could survive too. An hour passed with no sign. Caleb's flashlight began to dim. The forest was eating time, and with every step, the weight of failure pressed heavier. But then he saw it. A makeshift shelter built from crates and wire, half hidden behind a ridge. As he crept closer, he heard shuffling. Breathing. Caleb held his breath and peeked inside. Empty. Just bones, dirt, old collars. But something behind it, something moved. He followed the noise until he reached a thicket of vines. The flashlight caught a flash of fur and a chain. Caleb's voice broke as he stepped closer. "Bruno." A shape shifted, too slow. And then the eyes appeared, recognizing, desperate. Bruno was chained to a stake, dirty and trembling, but alive. Caleb fell to his knees, reaching through. "I'm here, buddy. I got you." Bruno didn't bark. He didn't growl. He leaned into Caleb's hand, tail thumping weakly. But then, a snap. A voice. Someone was close. "Hey, who's there?" Caleb froze. Bruno growled low. A flashlight beam cut through the woods behind them. Caleb fumbled with the chain, heart thundering. He picked the lock blindly, hands slick with sweat. Footsteps approached. A second voice joined the first. "Check the other side. They can't be far." Finally, the lock gave way. Bruno stumbled, but Caleb caught him. They ran, limping, weaving, cutting through thick brush. The voices faded, then surged again. Caleb didn't stop. He held Bruno close when he stumbled, urged him forward when he slowed. The forest closed behind them like a curtain, but Caleb remembered the terrain. He led them to a creek bed, then ducked beneath a downed tree, covering them both with a camo blanket he'd packed just in case. Footsteps passed within feet. The men cursed and moved on. Only then did Caleb allow himself to breathe. Bruno licked his hand once, slow. Caleb pressed his forehead to the dog's and whispered, "Almost there. Just hold on." They waited in silence, the sound of crickets slowly returning. And when the danger finally passed, Caleb rose, lifted Bruno into his arms, and began the long, quiet walk home. Caleb emerged from the woods just as dawn began to break, his arms aching, shirt torn, and legs muddy from the escape. Bruno was limp but conscious, wrapped in Caleb's jacket like a wounded soldier carried home. As the sleepy town stirred awake, Caleb stumbled toward the nearest house with a porch light still glowing. A woman answered the door, startled at the sight of them both. Without hesitation, she called the local vet, and within minutes, help arrived. Bruno was rushed into care, his vitals weak but stabilizing. Caleb didn't leave his side, even when exhaustion pulled at his eyes. He kept whispering to Bruno, promising him they were safe now, that the nightmare was over. Hours passed before the vet returned with cautious optimism. Bruno would live. He had internal bruising, dehydration, and old scars that told a story Caleb already suspected but hadn't fully known. The truth unraveled over the next few days. The compound Bruno had been held in was a front for illegal dogfighting and breeding. When Bruno had gone missing, he'd been lured away and captured. But according to the vet, what was remarkable wasn't just Bruno's survival, but how he had likely protected another dog in the process. The bruises on Bruno weren't just from beatings, they were defensive wounds. He had shielded a smaller dog, likely the stray Caleb found too late in the woods. The town's authorities raided the compound using the coordinates Caleb had shared. They found cages, chains, and the remnants of a brutal operation. But it was empty by the time they arrived. Whoever had been behind it had fled. Still, the media caught wind of Bruno's rescue. The story of a once feral German shepherd, feared and shunned, turning protector and surviving a nightmare, captured hearts everywhere. Caleb, too, became something of a local hero. Not because he fought with force, but because he never gave up on a dog no one else could touch. Bruno's recovery was slow, but each day he grew stronger. The old aggression faded, replaced with a new calm, almost as if he understood the chapter had closed. He began wagging his tail again, eating without flinching, trusting. Caleb built a larger enclosure in his yard, but Bruno hardly needed it. He never strayed far now. At night, he slept curled up beside Caleb's boots, as if guarding the only person who'd ever seen him as more than a beast. One afternoon, a group of school children came to visit, wanting to see the famous rescue dog. Caleb was nervous at first, unsure how Bruno would react. But the moment the kids approached the gate, Bruno stood tall, tail wagging. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He sat, ears perked, watching with calm eyes as they reached their tiny hands out in awe. Caleb knelt beside him and smiled. "You've come a long way, buddy." Weeks turned into months, and the nightmares that haunted both man and dog slowly faded. Caleb returned to training dogs part-time, often using Bruno as a gentle assistant. The irony never left him, that the dog once labeled dangerous was now helping other traumatized animals heal. One day, a woman arrived at his doorstep holding a leash with a trembling puppy, barely able to look up. "They told me you were the one who could help," she said. Bruno walked up to the puppy slowly, sat beside him, and gave a soft, approving sniff. The puppy stopped shaking. On the anniversary of Bruno's rescue, the town held a small ceremony at the park. They unveiled a plaque honoring not just the dog, but the bond between him and Caleb. It read, "In memory of the broken, and in celebration of those who never gave up." As the crowd clapped and cameras flashed, Caleb bent down and kissed the top of Bruno's head. "This is your moment too," he whispered. That night, back at home, Caleb opened the back door and let Bruno out into the yard. The sky was full of stars, and the breeze carried the faintest scent of pine and safety. Bruno didn't run. He simply stood there for a while, breathing it all in, then turned and trotted back inside. He nudged Caleb's leg, then curled up on his favorite rug. Caleb sat beside him, resting a hand on his back. Everything they had endured, every fear, Every scar, every impossible twist, had led them here, together, whole, and finally at peace. In the quiet mornings that followed, Caleb found himself waking up not to silence, but to the soft thump of a tail against the floorboards and the rustle of paws padding beside him. Bruno had become more than a companion. He was part of Caleb's breath, rhythm, and routine. Where once there had been a broken man and an untouchable dog, now stood a pair so deeply connected that words were no longer needed. They moved in sync, on walks through the forest, in still evenings by the fireplace, even in moments of calm, where Bruno would rest his head on Caleb's lap as if to say, "We're okay now." Caleb had changed, too. The anger he once carried in his chest like a weight had lightened. The world no longer felt so sharp, so cold. Bruno had taught him patience, vulnerability, and above all, the strength it takes to love something that others gave up on. They had both been shaped by pain, and yet, somehow, together they had reshaped each other. Caleb no longer saw Bruno as a rescue. He saw him as a savior. Word of Bruno's story had traveled far beyond the town. Letters came from families who had feared aggressive dogs, from trainers asking how Caleb had done it, and from people who just needed hope. Caleb always wrote back the same thing. He wasn't the one who changed. He just needed someone to see past the fear. That message echoed in every conversation, every interview, and every child who knelt without fear to pet Bruno's head. Their home became a sanctuary, not just for healing dogs, but for healing hearts. Neighbors would stop by just to sit on the porch, sip coffee, and watch Bruno bask in the sun, tail lazily swishing. Caleb started a small nonprofit in Bruno's name, offering rehabilitation for misunderstood dogs. And every dog that crossed their path, Bruno would greet with that quiet, gentle confidence only he could give. He was proof that no soul is ever too far gone. On a crisp fall evening, Caleb stood by the edge of the woods, watching the leaves dance in golden light. Bruno sat beside him, eyes scanning the horizon, ears relaxed. There was no need to chase shadows anymore. No need to run. Caleb reached down, scratched behind Bruno's ear, and smiled. Not the smile of someone who had won a fight, but of someone who had finally found peace. They had both been lost in different ways. But in the end, they found something unshakable in each other. Loyalty, understanding, and a kind of love that asked for nothing but presence. Bruno, the dog who no one could touch, had become the heart of everything good in Caleb's world. And that was enough. What would you do if you had to save a dog who had lost all trust in people? Would you be brave enough to stand by their side and help them heal? Caleb and Bruno's journey reminds us that sometimes, the most broken hearts just need a little time, patience, and someone willing to see the goodness hiding beneath the surface. Now, we want to hear from you. Have you ever helped an animal in need? Or maybe you've had a bond with a pet that changed your life, just like Caleb and Bruno's bond did. Drop your stories in the comments below and share how you and your pet or animal companion overcame challenges together. If you felt inspired by Bruno's transformation, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Spread the love. And if you want to see more heartwarming stories just like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel. There are so many more incredible journeys to be shared, and you don't want to miss out. Join our growing community of animal lovers, and let's continue to celebrate the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. Your support helps us create more stories of hope and transformation. So, what do you think? Could you help a dog like Bruno find trust again? Let us know, and let's keep this conversation going.